He signed my name without asking. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the money, not the argument that came after, not even the night I found the paperwork folded inside a kitchen drawer like it was a grocery list. It's that he signed my name, and then looked me in the eye at dinner, and asked if I wanted more pasta. My name is Simone. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed pharmacist. I've been paying my own rent since I was 22, and for the last 4 years I've been married to a man I genuinely loved. A man who turned out to be very good at two things: making me feel safe, and making decisions he never told me about. His father had been sick on and off for years. Chronic back issues, then a knee surgery that dragged into a longer recovery than anyone expected. I understood that. I liked his father, actually. Quiet man, old school, worked 30 years in warehouse logistics before his body stopped cooperating. I had no problem helping. I said so more than once, early in our marriage before the helping became a system. My father-in-law lived 40 minutes north of us in a 2-bedroom house that needed more work than he could afford. His wife, my mother-in-law, a woman who communicated primarily through sighing and comparing, had decided years ago that her son's paycheck and her son's wife's paycheck were functionally the same thing. She never said this directly, she didn't have to. It came through in other ways. The first time she called me at work, I thought something was wrong. She asked, very sweetly, if I knew anything about refinancing options. I said I wasn't really the right person to ask. She said, "Oh, I just figured since you deal with insurance all day you'd understand these things." I didn't correct her. I said I'd mention it to my husband. I didn't think about it again for 2 weeks, until he told me over dinner that he'd helped them look into it. Helped how? I asked. Just made some calls, he said, talked to their mortgage guy. That was year 1. By year 3, the helping had structure. Monthly transfers. Not huge, a few hundred here, a few hundred there, categorized in our joint account under family support. I'd agreed to that in principle. We'd talked about it. What I hadn't agreed to, what I hadn't even been told about, was what happened in November of last year, about 6 weeks before I found the papers in the kitchen drawer. My father-in-law's truck needed replacing. He drove it for work, or had before the knee, and still used it for hauling equipment for the part-time contracting he'd picked back up. It was a legitimate need. I would have said yes to helping. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I would have said yes. I was never the villain in this story, even though I was treated like one the moment I started asking questions. My husband co-signed a personal loan for his father, $42,000, 54 months, and he put my name on it too. I found out on a Tuesday. The drawer I'm talking about is the one next to the stove, the one that collects everything. Takeout menus, batteries, a tape measure, old birthday cards. I was looking for the warranty card for our dishwasher, which had started making a sound like it was trying to digest gravel. And there it was, a folded printout from the lender. 2 pages, both our names at the top. I stood in the kitchen for probably 3 minutes reading it. Then I folded it back exactly the way I found it and put it back in the drawer. I didn't say anything at dinner, or that night. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I said a single word, because I already knew, from 4 years of being married to this man, from watching how his family operated, from every "we'll talk about it" that turned into "it's already done," that if I came in as emotional I would lose the room. I would become the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the wife who made everything about money. So instead, I opened my laptop after he went to sleep, and I read everything I could find about co-signed loans. What they meant for credit, what happened if the primary borrower defaulted, what my legal exposure looked like. I read for 2 hours, and when I finally closed the laptop, my hands were cold. The next morning I called my college roommate, who works in financial services, from my car in the pharmacy parking lot before my shift. I told her what I'd found. She asked me twice if I was sure my name was on it. I told her I'd read it 4 times. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Okay, don't touch anything, don't move money, and find out if you signed anything or if he forged your signature." I hadn't signed anything, I was almost certain of that, but almost certain wasn't certain enough. I need to back up here because there's a piece of this that explains why I didn't see it coming, or why I told myself I didn't. My mother-in-law had been making comments about our finances for years in that particular way some women do. Not accusations, just observations. Little ones, placed carefully like furniture you keep stubbing your toe on in the dark. She'd ask what pharmacy chain I worked for and then say, "Oh, those corporate ones pay well, don't they?" She'd mention in passing that her son worked so hard in a tone that implied he wasn't being adequately recognized for it. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, she told my own mother that I was lucky to have a career like that. My mother smiled and said nothing. I saw her jaw tighten. The comments were always about luck. Never about the 6 years of schooling. Never about the licensing exams, or the debt I'd paid off, or the fact that I worked rotating shifts including nights and Saturdays. Always luck. As if I'd stumbled into a paycheck and should be grateful for the opportunity to share it. My husband absorbed this framing without ever questioning it. And because I loved him, because I want to be a good wife and a good daughter-in-law and a good person, absorbed it quietly too for longer than I should have. It wasn't one big thing. That's what I want people to understand who have never been in a situation like this. It's never one big thing at first. It's 40 small things over 3 years. Each one just small enough that you feel unreasonable for making it bigger than it is. And by the time the actual big thing happens, you've already been trained to minimize. I gave myself 5 days before I said anything to my husband. 5 days of going to work, filling prescriptions, smiling at patients, coming home, making dinner, watching television. 5 days of watching him be completely genuinely relaxed. That told me something too. On Saturday morning, I waited until he'd had his coffee. Then I sat down across from him at the kitchen table and put the folded papers between us. He looked at them, he looked at me. Something shifted in his face, not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a person who's miscalculated and is already working out what the least costly explanation might be. I was going to tell you, he said. When it was finalized. It is finalized, I said. It's been finalized. My name is on a $42,000 loan. I never signed anything. When were you going to tell me? He said the lender had needed a co-borrower with strong credit. He said his father's credit wasn't there yet from some old accounts. He said they'd needed to move quickly because the deal on the truck was time sensitive. He said he knew I'd be fine with it because I'd always supported his family. He said he didn't think it was a big deal. I let him finish. You made a financial commitment in my name, I said, without my consent. You used my credit without asking. Do you understand that if your father stops paying this, I'm responsible? That this shows up on my credit report. He's not going to stop paying it. That's not the point. You're making it into something it isn't. And there it was. That sentence. The one I'd heard in smaller forms for 4 years every time I named something that made him uncomfortable. You're making it into something it isn't. Meaning, your perception is the problem, not my behavior. Meaning, if you would just stop noticing things, everything would be fine. I didn't argue. I looked at him for a moment and then I said, I need some time to think. He looked relieved. He thought that meant I was going to absorb it. I was not going to absorb it. The next week I spent doing what I'd spent my whole professional life learning to do: research and documentation. I pulled our joint account history for the past 3 years and went through it line by line. I documented every transfer, every family support payment, every charge I didn't recognize. Then I cross-referenced it against our conversations, texts, emails, anything where I'd been told about an expense, versus where money had simply moved without discussion. The pattern was clear when I laid it out. It wasn't equal. For every transfer we'd discussed, there were 2 or 3 I'd either been told about after the fact or not told about at all. Small amounts that I'd let slide because confronting every single one felt exhausting. But compiled over 36 months, they added up to something that was no longer small. I also called my bank. I asked what my options were regarding the loan. I talked to a consumer credit attorney, a 20-minute consultation, which cost me $200 and was worth every penny, who told me that because the loan had been executed in my name without my signature, I had grounds to dispute my inclusion as a co-borrower. It would be a process. It would require documentation. But it was possible. I want to be precise here. I didn't decide that day what I was going to do with that information. I just made sure I had it. Because I'd learned something important about my marriage. Silence in our house had been interpreted as agreement. And I was done agreeing to things I'd never consented to. My mother-in-law called me the following Sunday. Not my husband, me, which was unusual. She started warmly, the way people do when they want something. Asked how work was going, mentioned she'd seen a segment on the news about pharmacy shortages, said she'd been thinking about me. It took about 4 minutes before she pivoted. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay, she said. With the loan situation. I kept my voice even. What specifically were you wondering? Well, I know my son mentioned it to you, and I just want you to know we are so grateful. It really took pressure off his father. You know how much stress he's been under. I noticed she said grateful, not sorry, not that she hoped I was okay with it. Grateful, as if I'd agreed to something generous rather than discovered that something had been done to me. I appreciate you calling, I said. I'm still working through some things on my end. I'll be in touch. She paused. Working through things? Mm-hmm. Is there a problem? I'll be in touch, I said again and said goodbye. I heard from my husband 20 minutes later. She'd called him the second we hung up. He came home early from the hardware store where he'd gone that morning and stood in the living room, looking like a man who had just realized the ground was less stable than he'd thought. She said you were cold to her. I was polite to her. She said something about you, working through things. I am working through things. What does that mean? He sat down. What are you actually doing? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about 4 years of being the person who kept the peace, who smoothed things over, who let the small things go because the relationship mattered more than the argument. I thought about the Saturday mornings I'd worked, the nights I'd come home at midnight and found dinner dishes still in the sink. I thought about the kitchen drawer. I'm figuring out my options, I said. The real moment, the one I think about the way I think about the drive home after a long shift, where everything that happened during the day suddenly lands at once, was not a confrontation. It wasn't loud. It happened at his parents' house a few weeks later at a dinner I almost didn't go to. My mother-in-law had invited us for what she called a catch-up dinner, which in our family meant she had something to say and wanted witnesses. His aunt was there, a neighbor couple they'd known for 20 years. His father at the head of the table, quieter than usual, which I'd learned to read as either pain flare or guilt. Sometimes both. We were somewhere between the salad and the main course when my mother-in-law touched my arm and said, loud enough for the table, I was telling Sandra about what a team you two are. It takes real partnership to help family the way you do. Not every wife is as understanding as you. Sandra smiled. The neighbor husband nodded. My husband reached for his water. I put down my fork. I didn't make a speech. I didn't raise my voice or cry or make a scene. I looked at my mother-in-law and I said calmly and clearly, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what I agreed to, and I think it's worth clearing that up. The table went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of people pausing to listen, the tight, pressurized quiet of people who can feel something about to shift. My mother-in-law laughed softly. Oh, you don't need to worry about any of that here. I'm not worried, I said. I just want to be accurate, because agreements I didn't make are being described as choices I made. And that's not a small thing. My husband said my name once, low. I picked my fork back up. I'm not making a scene, I said pleasantly. I'm just being clear. The dinner ended early. On the drive home, my husband drove the way he always drove when he was upset. Both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead, jaw working like he was trying to chew through something. You embarrassed them, he said. I corrected a mischaracterization. In front of their friends. She made the mischaracterization in front of their friends. He was quiet for a long time. Then what do you want from me? That was the first honest question he'd asked me in weeks, maybe longer. I want you to understand, I said, that what happened with the loan was not okay. Not because of the money, not because of your dad, because you used my name without asking me. And I need that to not happen again. It won't. I know, I said. Because I've already talked to the bank. He looked at me then, first time in the whole drive. What does that mean? It means I know what my options are, and I've separated some of our accounts in the meantime, just to protect my credit while I figure this out. I'm not doing anything drastic, I'm just being careful. He looked back at the road. You already did that? Without telling me? I let the irony of that sentence sit in the air between us for a moment. He heard it. I could tell by the way his shoulders dropped. Over the next 10 days, things became very clear, very quickly. My mother-in-law called my husband every day. I know this because he told me, and because I could hear his end of the conversations from the other room. Quiet, tight, careful. She was, according to him, devastated, felt disrespected, couldn't understand why I was being so legalistic about something that was family. Family. That word did a lot of work in our marriage. My father-in-law called once. That surprised me. He left a voicemail while I was at work, a short one, said he hoped we could talk, said he appreciated everything I'd done and he was sorry things had gotten complicated. It was the most direct thing he'd ever said to me in 4 years. I saved the voicemail. My husband and I had long conversations that week. Real ones, finally, the kind we should have been having for years. He told me he hadn't thought I'd be upset because I'd always helped. I told him there was a difference between choosing to help and having help extracted without your knowledge. He told me his parents had always struggled financially and he felt guilty. I told him I understood that, and it didn't justify what he'd done. He asked me if I was going to pursue the dispute with the lender. I told him I hadn't decided yet, but I'd talk to the attorney again. He asked what the attorney said. I told him the attorney said I had a reasonable case, but that it would be cleaner if the loan was refinanced into his father's name alone, or if my name was formally removed, and that the most straightforward path would be for his father to refinance with a different co-borrower, someone who had actually agreed to it. My husband went quiet for a long time after that. He'd have to find someone else, he finally said. Yes. Or bring his credit up and do it alone. Yes, that could take a year, I know. I'm sorry about that, but I need my name off a loan I didn't sign. There was a night about a week later when everything kind of cracked open. My husband came home and sat on the edge of the couch and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, not defensive, not calculating, just tired. Tired in the way people get when they've been holding a position that cost them more than they expected. I think I've been doing this wrong, he said, the way I handle things with my family. I didn't say anything, I wanted him to keep going. I've always thought that if I could just keep everyone happy, he said slowly, you included, everything would be okay. I didn't think of it as taking anything from you. I don't know what I thought, that it would just work out. It doesn't work out on its own, I said. Someone pays for it. He nodded. I've been the someone, I said, for a long time. He looked up at me then. I know. It wasn't a resolution, it was a beginning of one, which is a different and harder thing. But it was real. The first thing that had felt real in months. The loan was refinanced 4 months later. My father-in-law worked with a credit union, brought in his brother-in-law as a co-signer, someone who actually agreed to it, and my name came off the original loan. I got the confirmation letter on a Thursday and sat with it for a while before I felt anything. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was closer to relief. The relief of having a thing that was wrong made right, which is quieter than victory and lasts longer. My mother-in-law has not brought up money to me since the dinner. She is careful with me now in a way that I find both uncomfortable and necessary. She's not warm the way she used to be, but the warmth she had before was conditional, and I understand that now. Conditional warmth is just leverage wearing a different coat. My husband and I are still together. That might surprise some people, or it might not, depending on what they've been through themselves. We did couples counseling, 4 months of it, with a therapist who did not let either of us be vague. I learned things about how my husband grew up that helped me understand, without excusing, the patterns he'd carried into our marriage. He learned things about me that he should have already known, and owned the fact that he hadn't tried harder to know them. We still have a joint account. We also both have individual accounts now, which our therapist described as a financial structure that reflects 2 adults in a partnership rather than a merger. That framing helped my husband more than it helped me. I already knew what I was. I still work Saturdays sometimes. I still come home at midnight occasionally and find dishes in the sink. Some things don't change. But when his mother calls now with a question about options, he says I'll talk to my wife first, and then he actually does. I spent a long time being the person who made things work by quietly absorbing the cost. I don't do that anymore. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally understood that absorbing the cost wasn't keeping the peace. It was funding a fiction. And fictions, eventually, become too expensive to maintain. The kitchen drawer still collects everything. Take out menus, batteries, a tape measure. I cleaned it out a few months ago and found the dishwasher warranty I'd been looking for. Right where it had always been. I just hadn't looked carefully enough before. I look carefully now.